Eleanor Whitman's coffee cup slipped from her trembling fingers, shattering against the kitchen floor as she collapsed. Four massive wolves immediately formed a protective circle around the unconscious 76-year-old woman, their amber eyes gleaming in the morning light. The 911 dispatcher's voice crackled through Mrs. Henderson's phone. "Ma'am, did you say wolves are attacking your neighbor?" "No, you don't understand," the elderly woman shrieked from her window. "They're protecting her." The largest wolf, a gray beast named Shadow, raised his head and howled, a sound that sent chills through every soul in Cedar Falls, Montana. Tommy, the smallest of the pack, gently nuzzled Eleanor's pale face while Luna and Frost maintained their guard positions. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Sheriff Davidson's voice boomed over the radio. "All units, we have a code red wildlife situation. Approach with extreme caution." What had this lonely widow done to earn such fierce loyalty from nature's most feared predators? And would anyone believe the impossible truth? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 3 years earlier, Eleanor Whitman had been a different woman entirely. At 73, she possessed the kind of quiet dignity that comes from decades of shaping young minds in Cedar Falls Elementary's kindergarten classroom. Her modest 2-story home on Maple Street had once buzzed with the laughter of holiday gatherings, birthday celebrations, and Sunday dinners that stretched late into the evening. But tragedy has a way of rewriting even the most carefully planned stories. The phone call came on a rainy Tuesday in March, the kind of call that splits life into before and after. Robert, her husband of 47 years, and their only son, Michael, had been driving home from Billings when a drunk driver ran a red light. Both died instantly. Eleanor buried them side by side in Cedar Falls Cemetery, then returned to a house that suddenly felt cavernous. The silence was deafening. She found herself setting the table for 3 out of habit, cooking enough pot roast for a family, and talking to Robert's empty recliner as if he might answer back. "Well, I'll be jiggered," she would murmur to his photograph each morning over coffee. "Another day to get through, I suppose." The people of Cedar Falls meant well. Former colleagues from the elementary school brought casseroles and offers to help. Church members invited her to join the widow's auxiliary. But Eleanor had always been proudly self-sufficient, and grief made her even more so. She politely declined most invitations, preferring the familiar rhythm of solitude. What nobody knew was that Eleanor was sitting on a fortune she refused to touch. Robert's life insurance policy had paid out $2.3 million, more money than she'd ever dreamed of having, but something about accessing it felt wrong, like profiting from loss. The money sat untouched in a savings account while Eleanor chose between heating oil and prescription medications each month. Her Social Security check of $1,247 barely covered the basics in a house built for a large family. The mortgage still had 15 years remaining. The roof needed repairs, and the old furnace wheezed through every winter like it might be its last. But Eleanor was stubborn as a mule, as Robert used to say with fond exasperation. She volunteered at the food bank twice a week, distributed her famous apple pies to shut-ins, and maintained her small garden with the determination of someone who needed purpose more than she needed comfort. The children she'd taught over 3 decades would wave when they passed, now grown with children of their own. "Miss Eleanor was the best teacher ever," they'd tell their kids. "She made us feel special." But evenings were the hardest. When darkness fell over Cedar Falls and the mountains cast long shadows across her yard, loneliness crept in like a cold draft. Eleanor would sit in Robert's chair, wrapped in one of his old sweaters, and wonder if this was how the rest of her story would unfold, one quiet, empty day after another, until there were no more days left. She had no idea that 4 tiny lives were about to change everything. The whimpering started just after dawn on a crisp September morning, so faint Eleanor almost mistook it for the wind through the pine trees. She paused at her kitchen sink, coffee mug halfway to her lips, straining to hear. There it was again, a desperate, keening sound that tugged at something deep in her chest. "Lord willing and the creek don't rise," she muttered, setting down her cup and reaching for Robert's old work jacket. At her age, investigating strange noises probably wasn't the wisest choice, but 30 years of teaching kindergarten had given her an ear for distress calls. The sound led her past her vegetable garden, now mostly picked clean for the season, toward the massive oak tree that had fallen during last month's storm. She'd been meaning to call someone about removing it, but the estimate had been more than her monthly grocery budget. As she rounded the enormous trunk, Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. 4 tiny bundles of gray fur huddled beneath the fallen branches, their eyes barely open, bodies trembling with cold and hunger. Wolf cubs, she realized with a start. No bigger than her fist, they couldn't have been more than 6 weeks old. Their mother was nowhere in sight. Eleanor knelt carefully, her arthritic knees protesting against the damp ground. One of the cubs, smaller than the others with distinctive amber eyes, lifted his head weakly at her approach. His tiny mouth opened in a soundless cry that broke her heart. "Well, I'll be," she whispered, looking around for any sign of the mother wolf. That's when she spotted the dark stain on the nearby rocks, dried blood, and several shell casings glinting in the morning light. Poachers. Someone had killed their mother and left these babies to die. Eleanor had lived in Montana long enough to know that raising wolves was a federal crime. The penalties were severe, up to $100,000 in fines and possible jail time. At her age, she couldn't survive prison, but looking at these helpless creatures, she couldn't walk away either. "I've already lost everything that mattered," she said to the cubs, her voice thick with emotion. "What's one more risk?" The decision made, Eleanor shrugged out of Robert's jacket and gently gathered the cubs inside. They were so weak they barely protested, their tiny bodies feeling fragile as porcelain in her weathered hands. The smallest one, she found herself already thinking of him as Tommy for his resemblance to a stuffed animal Michael had loved, nestled against her chest with a sigh that sounded almost human. Back in her kitchen, Eleanor emptied a dresser drawer and lined it with soft towels, creating a makeshift nursery. The cubs huddled together, their breathing rapid and shallow. She had no idea what wolf cubs ate, but desperation bred creativity. She warmed some whole milk and mixed it with a beaten egg, then used an old medicine dropper to coax the mixture into their tiny mouths. The first feeding took over an hour. 3 of the cubs, she mentally named them Shadow, Luna, and Frost for their markings, took the milk eagerly enough. But Tommy, the runt, seemed too weak to swallow. Eleanor found herself holding him skin to skin against her chest, the way she'd done with premature lambs during her childhood on her grandfather's farm. "Come on, little one," she whispered, feeling his heartbeat flutter against her palm. "Don't you give up on me now." For 3 days, Eleanor barely slept. The cubs needed feeding every 2 hours, day and night. She moved their makeshift den into her bedroom, setting her alarm for regular intervals. By the 4th day, her back ached from bending over them, her eyes burned from exhaustion, and she'd gone through a week's worth of groceries making their formula, but they were growing stronger. Shadow, the largest, had appointed himself protector of the group, growling at shadows and positioning himself between his siblings and any perceived threat. Luna, with her distinctive white facial markings, showed an almost eerie intelligence, watching Eleanor's every move as if memorizing her routines. Frost, pure gray with ice blue eyes, was the most playful, tumbling over his siblings and pouncing on Eleanor's slippers. And Tommy, sweet, fragile Tommy, had claimed Eleanor as his personal property. He cried when she left the room and settled only when curled against her side. Despite being the smallest, he seemed the most emotionally aware, somehow sensing when Eleanor's grief threatened to overwhelm her and pressing his warm body against her with instinctive comfort. When her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, knocked on the door to borrow sugar, Eleanor quickly covered the cubs with a blanket and explained the soft sounds as "some puppies I'm fostering for the animal shelter." The lie came easier than she'd expected, born from the fierce protectiveness that had awakened in her heart. "Wolf-dog hybrids," she elaborated when Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rose at the unusual-looking puppies. "Poor things were abandoned. I couldn't just leave them to die." The deception worked, for now. But as the cubs grew stronger and more active, Eleanor realized she was walking a tightrope between love and the law, and the fall would destroy them all. 6 months had passed since Eleanor first brought the cubs home, and what had once been manageable was rapidly becoming impossible to hide. The puppies now stood knee-high and possessed the unmistakable features of their wild heritage: elongated snouts, pointed ears that swiveled at every sound, and eyes that held an intelligence far beyond any domestic dog. Dr. Sarah Martinez had been Eleanor's veterinarian for over a decade, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who'd seen every kind of animal emergency Cedar Falls could produce. When Eleanor called requesting a house visit for her hybrid puppies, Sarah had agreed without hesitation, remembering the elderly woman's dedication to every stray that had crossed her path over the years. But the moment Sarah stepped into Eleanor's living room and saw the 4 young wolves arranged protectively around their human mother, her medical bag slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers. "Mrs. Whitman," she said carefully, her voice tight with controlled alarm, "these aren't wolf-dog hybrids. These are pure wolves. Do you understand what you're doing?" Eleanor's composure crumbled like autumn leaves. Tears she'd been holding back for months spilled down her weathered cheeks as Tommy immediately moved to her side, pressing his warm flank against her legs in comfort. "They're my family, Sarah," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They're all I have left." The veterinarian found herself caught between professional obligation and human compassion. By law, she should report Eleanor immediately. Wildlife Services would seize the wolves within hours, and Eleanor would face federal charges that could destroy what remained of her life. But watching the obvious bond between the elderly woman and the 4 magnificent creatures, Sarah felt her resolve wavering. "Eleanor, you could go to prison for this. These are federally protected animals. The fines alone could bankrupt you, and at your age—" She trailed off, seeing the stubborn set of Eleanor's jaw that every teacher in Cedar Falls knew meant an immovable decision had been made. "I know what I'm risking," Eleanor said quietly, "but I also know what I've gained. When Robert and Michael died, I thought my life was over. These babies gave me a reason to wake up each morning. Tommy here," she gestured to the amber-eyed wolf who hadn't left her side. "He knew when I was crying before I even knew it myself. Shadow guards my house better than any security system. Luna seems to read my mind, and Frost makes me laugh when I thought I'd forgotten how." Dr. Martinez watched as Luna approached with a gentle whine, dropping a tissue box at Eleanor's feet. The behavior was so deliberately helpful, so aware of human emotion, that it took her breath away. "How long have they been doing things like that?" "From the beginning," Eleanor admitted. "They're not just smart, Sarah. They're connected to me somehow. When I had that dizzy spell last month, Tommy ran to get my blood pressure medication before I even asked. When the mailman startled me and I dropped my keys, Frost picked them up and brought them to me. They take care of me as much as I take care of them." The veterinarian knelt slowly, allowing Shadow to sniff her extended hand. The large wolf studied her with calculating eyes before apparently deciding she posed no threat to his pack. "Eleanor, what you've accomplished here is extraordinary, but it's also incredibly dangerous. Not just legally. Wolves are still wild animals. Their instincts could kick in at any time. Instincts like protecting the person who raised them from birth? Eleanor asked pointedly. Like bringing me my slippers every morning and lying by my bed when I have nightmares. These wolves know love, Sarah. They know family. Maybe that makes them different from wild wolves, or maybe it makes them more like what wolves were meant to be. Dr. Martinez spent the next hour examining each wolf, marveling at their perfect health and obvious contentment. Their coats were glossy, their eyes bright, their behavior toward both women respectful but unafraid. Most remarkably, they seemed to anticipate Eleanor's needs with an awareness she'd never witnessed in any animal. "I'll need to think about this," she finally said, packing her equipment. "What you're asking me to do, keeping this secret, providing veterinary care, makes me an accessory to a federal crime." Eleanor nodded, understanding the position she was putting the younger woman in. "I won't blame you if you have to report us, but please, just give me tonight to prepare them. They've never known any home but this one." As Dr. Martinez drove away, her mind churned with the implications of what she'd witnessed. Eleanor Whitman wasn't a criminal. She was a lonely widow who'd found a second chance at motherhood in the most unlikely circumstances. The wolves weren't dangerous predators. They were family members who happened to have 4 legs and fangs. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to either woman, Marcus Brennan had been watching Eleanor's property through binoculars from his truck parked on the ridge above her house. The 48-year-old rancher had noticed the unusual activity around the Whitman place for weeks, deliveries of large bags of what looked like specialty pet food, the strange sounds that carried on the wind at night, and Eleanor's increasingly reclusive behavior. Marcus had his own painful history with wolves. 5 years earlier, his 8-year-old daughter Emma had been killed by a rabid wolf while the family was camping in Glacier National Park. The tragedy had destroyed his marriage, consumed him with rage, and turned him into Cedar Falls' most vocal advocate for aggressive wolf management policies. Through his binoculars, Marcus watched as a large gray animal moved past Eleanor's kitchen window, too large to be a dog, with a gait he recognized from years of hunting. His hands tightened on the binoculars as realization dawned. "That crazy old woman is harboring wolves," he whispered to himself, thinking of Emma's small grave in the cemetery. "I won't let another child die because someone thinks they can domesticate wild animals." The confrontation that would change all their lives was now inevitable. Dr. Martinez's promise to keep Eleanor's secret lasted exactly 3 sleepless nights. On the 4th morning, she made a decision that would prove both merciful and fateful. She would help Eleanor manage the situation properly rather than report it to authorities. But her decision came too late to prevent what Marcus Brennan had already set in motion. Marcus had spent those same 3 days documenting everything he could about Eleanor's property. His trail cameras captured clear footage of all 4 wolves moving freely around the yard. His telephoto lens recorded them playing, hunting mice, and displaying the unmistakable pack behavior of wild wolves. Most damning of all, he had video of Eleanor hand-feeding them, treating them like beloved pets rather than the dangerous predators he knew them to be. Armed with his evidence, Marcus marched into Sheriff Davidson's office on Thursday morning, his jaw set with grim determination. Sheriff Tom Davidson had known Marcus since they were boys, had attended Emma's funeral, and understood the depth of the man's pain. But even he was shocked by what Marcus showed him. "Jesus Christ, Marcus," Davidson muttered, watching the footage on Marcus's phone. "That's Mrs. Whitman from the elementary school. She taught half this town, including my kids." "I don't care if she's Mother Teresa," Marcus said coldly. "She's harboring 4 full-grown wolves in a residential area. What happens when one of them decides the Henderson's grandson looks like prey? What happens when they get loose during a school day?" Davidson rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of an impossible situation. Eleanor Whitman was one of Cedar Falls' most beloved figures. A woman who'd shaped 3 generations of children, who still volunteered at every community event despite her recent losses. But the law was clear, and Marcus's concerns weren't unreasonable. "I'll have to bring in wildlife services," Davidson said reluctantly. "This is federal jurisdiction, but Marcus, I want you to stay out of this. Let the professionals handle it." Marcus's laugh was bitter. "Professionals like the ones who told us wolves weren't dangerous 5 years ago. The same experts who said a rabid wolf attacking campers was a statistical anomaly?" He stood, gathering his evidence. "I'm giving you 48 hours to handle this legally, Tom. After that, I'm handling it my way." The sheriff watched his childhood friend leave, recognizing the dangerous gleam in Marcus's eyes. Tom Davidson had seen that look before, in the eyes of men who'd lost everything and had nothing left to lose. Meanwhile, Eleanor was beginning to sense that her carefully constructed world was crumbling. The wolves had grown increasingly restless over the past week, their acute senses picking up on threats she couldn't yet perceive. Shadow paced the perimeter of the yard each night, his hackles raised at scents carried on the wind. Luna watched the tree line with an intensity that made Eleanor nervous, while Frost had abandoned his playful nature in favor of constant vigilance. Only Tommy remained focused primarily on Eleanor herself, though even he seemed troubled. He'd taken to bringing her items throughout the day. Her reading glasses, her blood pressure medication, even her old photo albums. It was as if he sensed their time together might be limited and wanted to ensure she had everything she needed. Dr. Martinez arrived at Eleanor's house on Friday afternoon, her face grave with news she'd hoped never to deliver. "Eleanor, we need to talk. There are rumors spreading through town. People are asking questions about your hybrid dogs that are getting harder to answer." Eleanor's heart sank as she led Sarah into the living room, where the 4 wolves immediately arranged themselves around her chair in their customary protective formation. "How much time do we have?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "But I've been thinking about legal alternatives. There might be a way to get you a special permit, a wildlife rehabilitation license. It's a long shot, but if we could prove these wolves are too habituated to humans to survive in the wild, we might be able to establish this property as a private sanctuary." Hope flickered in Eleanor's chest for the first time in days. What would that require? Documentation of their dependency on human care, proof of your ability to provide adequate facilities, and most importantly, no history of aggressive behavior. But Eleanor, there's something else. "I've been researching wolf behavior, and what these 4 are displaying isn't normal. The level of emotional intelligence, the way they anticipate your needs, it's unprecedented." As if summoned by their conversation, Tommy approached Eleanor with something clutched gently in his mouth. It was her daily pill organizer, and he placed it precisely in her hands at the exact time she usually took her evening medications. Eleanor hadn't even realized it was that time yet. "How did he know?" Sarah whispered, watching the interaction with scientific fascination. "I stopped questioning it months ago," Eleanor replied, scratching behind Tommy's ears. "They know things about me that I don't even know about myself. Sometimes I think they understand me better than I understand them." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of vehicles pulling into Eleanor's driveway, multiple engines, official-sounding radio chatter, and the slam of car doors. The wolves immediately moved into high alert, Shadow positioning himself between Eleanor and the front door while the others flanked her chair. Sheriff Davidson's voice called from outside. "Mrs. Whitman, this is Sheriff Davidson. I need you to come out so we can talk." Eleanor's hands trembled as she stood, but she drew herself up with the dignity of someone who'd faced down countless kindergarten disruptions. "Stay here," she told the wolves, though she doubted they'd obey if they sensed she was in danger. Opening her front door, Eleanor found herself facing not just Sheriff Davidson, but 3 officers from Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, 2 federal agents, and Marcus Brennan standing behind them all with his arms crossed. and his face set in stone. "Mrs. Whitman," Davidson said gently, "I'm sorry, but we have reports that you're illegally harboring wild wolves on this property. I need you to confirm or deny these allegations." Eleanor looked past the sheriff to Marcus, seeing the pain and rage that drove him, but also recognizing something familiar in his eyes, something that tugged at a memory she couldn't quite grasp. "Marcus Brennan," she said quietly, "I remember you from when you were 8 years old. You used to sit in the front row of my classroom and ask 1,000 questions about everything." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. One of the federal agents stepped forward. "Ma'am, we need to search your property. We have reason to believe you're in possession of protected wildlife without proper permits." "They're not just wildlife," Eleanor said, her voice gaining strength. "They're my family. I raised them from babies when their mother was killed by poachers. They've never hurt anyone, never shown aggression toward a single person." "That's what everyone says until someone gets mauled," Marcus snapped, his composure finally cracking. "My 8-year-old daughter thought wolves were beautiful too, right up until one tore her throat out." The raw pain in his voice made Eleanor step back, her heart breaking for the loss he'd endured. "Marcus, I'm so sorry about Emma, but these wolves are the same species that killed my baby girl," he finished coldly, "and they're living 50 yards from where other children play." As if sensing the tension, Shadow appeared in the doorway behind Eleanor, his massive frame filling the space. The officers immediately reached for their weapons, but Eleanor quickly moved to stand between them and the wolf. "Don't you dare," she said fiercely. "He's protecting me, not threatening you. Shadow, back." The wolf looked at her for a long moment before reluctantly retreating into the house. But Eleanor could see the other 3 wolves moving through the windows, clearly agitated by the presence of strangers and the scent of fear and aggression. "Mrs. Whitman," the federal agent said more gently, "I understand you have emotional attachments to these animals, but they pose a serious safety risk. We're going to need you to step aside so we can safely contain them for relocation." "Relocation?" Eleanor's voice rose. "You mean killing them?" "Not necessarily," the agent replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "We'll evaluate them for possible placement in a wildlife facility." Eleanor knew what that meant. These wolves, raised in captivity and bonded to humans, would never qualify for sanctuary placement. They'd be euthanized within days, labeled as too dangerous to live and too dependent on humans to survive in the wild. "I won't let you take them," she said, stepping back toward her front door. "They're not hurting anyone." "Ma'am, you're interfering with a federal investigation," the agent warned. "Step aside or we'll have to arrest you." Eleanor looked at the faces surrounding her, some sympathetic, some determined, all representing a system that saw her wolves as nothing more than dangerous animals to be eliminated. Behind her, she could hear the soft whines of her 4-legged family, sensing her distress and responding with the same protective instincts that had kept them alive in the wild. "Then arrest me," she said quietly, stepping back into her house and closing the door. The siege of Eleanor Whitman's home was about to begin. The standoff began at 3:30 on a Friday afternoon and would last 18 hours that felt like 18 years. Eleanor had barricaded herself inside her home with the 4 wolves, while outside, a small army of law enforcement officials established a perimeter that grew larger as word spread through Cedar Falls. Sheriff Davidson tried reasoning with Eleanor through her front door for the better part of an hour. "Mrs. Whitman, please, we just want to talk. Nobody has to get hurt here." From inside, Eleanor's voice was steady but strained. "The only ones who will get hurt are my wolves if I let you in, Tom. I've raised these babies for 18 months. They're not wild animals. They're my children." Marcus Brennan paced behind the sheriff's patrol car like a caged animal himself, his hands clenched into fists. "This is ridiculous," he told anyone who would listen. "She's harboring dangerous predators in a residential neighborhood. What if they break out? What if they attack someone? By 6 o'clock, news vans from 3 different television stations had arrived. The story was irresistible. Beloved retired teacher holed up with pack of wolves defying federal authorities. Eleanor's former students began gathering across the street, some supporting her, others worried for her safety. Jenny Morrison, now 35 with children of her own, held a hastily made sign reading, "Mrs. Whitman saved my life too." She told reporters, "She taught me to read when everyone else had given up. If she says these wolves are safe, then they're safe." But Marcus had supporters as well. Parents clutched their children closer as they watched the drama unfold, remembering his daughter's tragic death and fearing for their own family's safety. Inside the house, Eleanor sat in Robert's old recliner with the 4 wolves arranged around her in their familiar protective formation. Tommy had positioned himself directly at her feet, his amber eyes never leaving her face. Shadow lay across the doorway to the kitchen, effectively blocking any entrance from the back of the house. Luna and Frost flanked her chair, alert but calm, as if drawing their emotional state from hers. "Well, boys and girls," Eleanor said softly, using the same tone she'd employed with countless kindergartners over the years. "We're in quite a pickle, aren't we?" Tommy whined softly and pressed his head against her knee. Eleanor stroked his fur, marveling at how much he'd grown since that first night when she'd held him against her chest to keep him warm. He was still the smallest of the 4, but his bond with her had only deepened over the months. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped into the 40s. Eleanor wrapped herself in Robert's old cardigan and settled in for what she knew would be a long night. She'd turned off all the lights except for a small lamp beside her chair, hoping the darkness would keep the wolves calm and make it harder for the authorities to see inside. Dr. Martinez had tried 3 times to reach Eleanor by phone, desperate to help but unsure how. Finally, around 9 o'clock, she made a decision that would change everything. She approached Sheriff Davidson's command post with her veterinary bag in hand. "Tom, I need to go in there," she announced. "Eleanor has a heart condition, and the stress of this situation could kill her. As her physician, I have a right to check on her welfare." Davidson looked skeptical. "Sarah, you know I can't let civilians into an active situation like this." "I'm not a civilian. I'm a medical professional, and Eleanor is my patient. Besides," she added, lowering her voice, "I might be able to talk sense into her. She trusts me." After conferring with the federal agents, Davidson reluctantly agreed. "Doctor." Martinez approached Eleanor's front door slowly, calling out her name. "Eleanor, it's Sarah. I'm coming in to check on you, okay?" The door opened a crack and Eleanor peered out. Seeing only her friend, she opened it wider. "Sarah, you shouldn't be here. It's not safe for you." "It's not safe for you either," Dr. Martinez replied, stepping inside. Her breath caught as she saw the 4 wolves arranged around Eleanor's chair like guardian angels. Despite the chaos outside, they seemed perfectly calm, their attention focused entirely on their human mother. "How are you holding up?" Sarah asked, kneeling beside Eleanor's chair to check her pulse. It was elevated, but not dangerously so. "I'm fine," Eleanor said, though her hands trembled slightly. "But I'm worried about what this is doing to them. They can sense the tension out there. Shadow hasn't moved from that doorway in 3 hours." As if hearing his name, the large gray wolf lifted his head and regarded Dr. Martinez with calculating eyes. She'd examined him before and knew he remembered her, but his protective instincts were clearly in overdrive. "Eleanor, they're talking about bringing in tranquilizer guns," Sarah said quietly. "Professional wildlife handlers. They want to sedate the wolves and transport them to a facility in Wyoming." Eleanor's face went pale. "They'll kill them, won't they?" "Maybe not right away, but eventually." Wolves raised by humans can't survive in the wild, and no sanctuary will take animals this bonded to people. Dr. Martinez nodded reluctantly. It was true. These wolves were caught in a bureaucratic nightmare where their love for Eleanor had become their death sentence. Outside, Marcus had convinced Sheriff Davidson to let him try talking to Eleanor. He approached the front door with the reluctant authorization of the federal agents, though they'd made it clear this was his only chance. "Mrs. Whitman," he called through the door. "This is Marcus Brennan. I'd like to talk to you about Emma." Eleanor's eyes widened. Through the window, she could see Marcus standing alone on her front porch, his hands visible and empty. Against Dr. Martinez's whispered protests, she opened the door. "Hello, Marcus," she said quietly. "I remember you as such a sweet little boy. You always wanted to help feed the classroom hamster." Marcus's jaw tightened at the memory. "That little boy's daughter is dead because of animals like the ones you're protecting." "I know about Emma," Eleanor said, her voice filled with genuine sorrow. "I'm sorry for your loss. But Marcus, these wolves didn't kill your daughter. A sick, rabid animal did. These four have never shown aggression toward anyone." "You can't guarantee that," Marcus shot back. "Wolves are predators. It's their nature. One day their instincts will kick in and someone will pay the price." As if summoned by their conversation, Tommy appeared at Eleanor's side. Marcus instinctively stepped back, his hand moving toward the gun at his hip, but the wolf made no aggressive moves. Instead, he seemed to study Marcus with an almost human intelligence before disappearing back into the house. Minutes later, Tommy returned carrying something carefully in his mouth. He approached the threshold and gently placed the object at Eleanor's feet before backing away. It was a small, weathered stuffed rabbit with pink fur and one missing ear. Marcus's face went white. "Where did you get that?" Eleanor picked up the toy, examining it with confusion. "I don't know. Tommy brought it to me a few weeks ago. He has a habit of collecting things during his walks around the property. I assumed it belonged to one of the neighbor children." "It's Emma's," Marcus whispered, his voice breaking. "Her favorite toy. She had it with her when she died. I thought it was lost forever." The rabbit had been carefully preserved, as if Tommy understood its importance. Eleanor handed it to Marcus, watching as tears filled his eyes for the first time since this confrontation began. "How did he know?" Marcus asked, clutching the stuffed animal to his chest. "How did he know this was important?" Eleanor looked back at Tommy, who was watching the exchange with those unnaturally intelligent amber eyes. "I've stopped trying to understand how they know things. I just know they do." For a moment, the hardened rancher who'd lost his daughter and the elderly teacher who'd found a new family stood facing each other across a threshold that represented far more than the entrance to a house. It was the space between grief and healing, between fear and understanding, between the past that couldn't be changed and the future that still might be. The standoff was about to take a turn that no one, not the federal agents, not Sheriff Davidson, not the gathered crowd, could have predicted. The wolves that Marcus had come to destroy were about to teach him something about the nature of love, loss, and the possibility of redemption. The moment Marcus clutched Emma's stuffed rabbit to his chest, something shifted in the air around Eleanor's house. The federal agents had given him 10 minutes to try reasoning with Eleanor, but those 10 minutes stretched into something that felt like a lifetime as the hardened rancher stood frozen on her front porch, tears streaming down his weathered face. "She carried this everywhere," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. "Even at 8 years old, she was embarrassed to still love it so much, but she couldn't sleep without it. After the attack, when we found her body, this was missing. I searched for hours, crawling through the brush, desperate to find it. The rescue teams thought I'd lost my mind." Eleanor felt her own tears starting as she watched this broken man holding the remnant of his daughter's childhood. Tommy had brought her dozens of objects over the months: sticks, interesting rocks, pieces of trash blown by the wind. But this small rabbit represented something far more precious than either of them had realized. "Marcus," she said gently, "maybe Tommy understood what it meant. Maybe he's been keeping it safe, waiting for the right moment to return it." "Wolves don't understand grief," Marcus said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "They don't comprehend human emotions or sentimental value." As if responding to his words, Luna appeared at Eleanor's side, carrying something else in her mouth. She approached the threshold cautiously, aware of Marcus's emotional distress, and placed a small object at Eleanor's feet before retreating. It was a child's hair ribbon, faded pink with tiny white flowers. Marcus's breath caught. That was Emma's, too. She was wearing it the day she died." Shadow emerged next, moving with unusual gentleness for such a large animal. In his mouth was a small sneaker, a child's hiking boot, size 2, with purple laces that Emma had chosen herself. One by one, the wolves were returning pieces of a little girl's final day, items they'd apparently been collecting and preserving with a care that defied everything Marcus believed about their nature. "This is impossible," he said, sinking onto Eleanor's front steps as Frost brought the final item, a small backpack with cartoon characters on it. "How could they know? How could they understand?" Eleanor sat beside him, her own heart breaking as she watched this mountain of a man crumble under the weight of unexpected kindness. "I've learned not to question what they understand. I just know they love deeply and remember everything important." Dr. Martinez, who had been watching from the doorway, approached slowly. "Marcus, there's something else you should know. These wolves have been exhibiting behavior I've never seen before. They don't just respond to Eleanor's emotions, they anticipate her needs, they comfort her during grief, they've even learned to recognize when she's having medical issues." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying these animals have developed something beyond normal pack bonding. They've learned empathy in a way that challenges everything we thought we knew about wolves." Marcus looked up at the 4 wolves, who had arranged themselves in a semicircle around Eleanor's chair, watching him with what he could only describe as compassionate awareness. "Emma loved animals," he said quietly. "She wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up. She used to rescue injured birds and bring home every stray cat she found." "She sounds like she was a wonderful little girl," Eleanor said, placing a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder. And I've spent 5 years hating an entire species because one sick animal took her away from me." He looked at Emma's belongings spread around his feet. "But these wolves, they found her things and kept them safe. For 5 years they preserved pieces of my daughter when I couldn't even find them." The emotional breakthrough was interrupted by the harsh crackle of radio static. Sheriff Davidson's voice cut through the night air. "Mrs. Whitman, we need to resolve this situation. The federal agents are getting impatient, and I can't hold them off much longer." Eleanor stood slowly, her arthritis protesting after sitting on the cold steps. "I know, Tom, but I won't let them kill my family." "Ma'am," came the voice of Agent Harrison through a megaphone, "you have 30 minutes to surrender the animals voluntarily, or we'll be forced to enter the premises and sedate them ourselves." Marcus looked at the stuffed rabbit in his hands, then at the 4 wolves who had become unwitting keepers of his daughter's memory. A decision was forming in his mind, one that would either save these magnificent creatures or damn them all. "Eleanor," he said, standing abruptly, "what if there was another way? What if we could make this legal?" "What do you mean?" "I've been fighting wolf protection laws for 5 years. I know every regulation, every loophole, every exception. There's something called a special circumstances permit for animals that can't survive in the wild due to human intervention, but it requires community support and an advocate with standing in the case. Eleanor's heart leaped with hope. Would you do that? Marcus looked at Emma's belongings one more time, then at the wolves who had somehow understood the sacred nature of a father's grief. My daughter would never forgive me if I let fear destroy something this beautiful. She'd want me to protect them, just like they protected her memory. As Marcus strode toward the command post, Eleanor felt Tommy press against her leg. The smallest wolf looked up at her with those knowing amber eyes, and for a moment she could swear he understood exactly what was happening. "Agent Harrison," Marcus called out as he approached the federal officers, "I'd like to propose an alternative to this standoff." The agent looked skeptical. "Mr. Brennan, you're the one who reported these animals in the first place. And now I'm the one asking you to reconsider," Marcus replied firmly. "These wolves pose no threat to the community. They've been living peacefully for 18 months without a single incident. Mrs. Whitman has proven they can be safely managed. Wildlife doesn't belong in residential areas, regardless of how well trained they appear to be," Harrison responded. Marcus pulled out his phone, showing the agent a video he'd recorded weeks earlier. "Look at this footage. Watch how they behave. This isn't normal predator behavior. It's family behavior. These animals have been psychologically imprinted on human beings. Releasing them into the wild would be a death sentence." Sheriff Davidson stepped forward. "Marcus, what exactly are you proposing?" "A special circumstances permit," Marcus said. "Eleanor's property could be designated as a private wildlife rehabilitation facility. She'd need to meet certain standards, install proper fencing, maintain veterinary oversight, but it's been done before for other species." Dr. Martinez, who had been listening from Eleanor's porch, approached the group. "I'd be willing to serve as the supervising veterinarian," she announced. "I can document their behavioral patterns, their health status, their inability to survive in wild conditions." Agent Harrison looked from Marcus to Dr. Martinez to the small crowd of Eleanor's former students who had gathered in support. Even if such a permit were possible, the application process takes months. "We can't leave dangerous animals in an unsecured area while bureaucrats shuffle paperwork." "Then we make it secure," Marcus said decisively. "I own a construction company. I can have proper fencing installed within a week, professional-grade enclosures that meet federal standards, and I'll personally guarantee their containment." Eleanor appeared on her porch, having heard the entire conversation. "Marcus, you'd do that, after everything you've believed about wolves?" Marcus looked at her, then at the 4 wolves arranged protectively around their human mother. Emma believed in second chances. She believed good could come from the most unexpected places. Maybe it's time I started believing that too. The federal agents conferred among themselves for several minutes, while the crowd held its collective breath. Finally, Agent Harrison approached Eleanor's porch. "Mrs. Whitman, if you're willing to work within the legal framework Mr. Brennan has outlined, we're prepared to grant a temporary 90-day permit while your application is processed, but this property will be subject to weekly inspections, and any sign of aggressive behavior from these animals will result in their immediate removal." Eleanor felt her knees go weak with relief. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, absolutely." As word spread through the crowd that the standoff was over and the wolves would be allowed to stay, Eleanor looked at Marcus with tears of gratitude streaming down her face. "Why?" she asked simply. Marcus held up Emma's stuffed rabbit, now returned to him after 5 years of loss. "Because sometimes angels have 4 legs and the wisdom to know what broken hearts need most." The crisis was over. But the real journey of healing, forgiveness, and understanding was just beginning. 3 weeks after the standoff, Eleanor Whitman sat in the cardiac intensive care unit at Cedar Falls General Hospital, her weathered hand connected to an IV line while machines monitored her irregular heartbeat. The stress of the confrontation, combined with months of hiding her secret, had finally taken its toll on her 76-year-old heart. Dr. Robert Chen, the cardiologist who'd been treating Eleanor since her admission, frowned at her latest test results. "Mrs. Whitman, your heart rhythm is still dangerously unstable. We need to keep you here for at least another week, possibly longer." "But my wolves," Eleanor protested weakly. "They don't understand why I haven't come home. Tommy hasn't eaten since they brought me here." Marcus Brennan, who had become an unexpected constant presence at Eleanor's bedside, leaned forward in his chair. "Dr. Martinez is checking on them twice a day. They're safe, Eleanor. You need to focus on getting better." What Marcus didn't tell her was how dire the situation had become. The four wolves had indeed stopped eating the day Eleanor was hospitalized. They'd positioned themselves at the windows facing the direction of town, as if waiting for her return. Tommy had escaped the newly installed fencing twice, somehow finding his way to the hospital parking lot before being retrieved by animal control. Dr. Martinez had shared the troubling news with Marcus that morning. "If Eleanor doesn't recover soon, we might lose them all. Wolves can literally die of grief. They're exhibiting signs of severe separation anxiety that could prove fatal." But there was something else troubling Marcus, something he hadn't shared with anyone yet. During one of his visits to check on the wolves, he discovered a box of documents in Eleanor's kitchen that changed everything he thought he knew about their connection. The papers were scattered across her kitchen table as if she'd been reviewing them before her collapse. Adoption records, medical files, and a birth certificate that bore the name Marcus Robert Whitman, born to Eleanor Marie Whitman on March 15, 1975. The baby had been placed for adoption with the Brennan family when Eleanor was just 16 years old. Marcus sat beside Eleanor's hospital bed, wrestling with the knowledge that the woman he'd threatened to destroy was his biological mother. The irony was devastating. He'd spent 5 years blaming wolves for taking his daughter, and now he'd nearly caused the death of the mother he'd never known he had. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Eleanor's tired eyes focused on his face. "What is it, dear?" Marcus pulled out the birth certificate he'd found. "Is there something you've been meaning to tell me?" Eleanor's face went pale as she recognized the document. Her hands trembled as she reached for it, tears immediately springing to her eyes. "Oh, God," she whispered. "How did you find that?" "It was on your kitchen table. Eleanor, are you my mother?" The admission that followed came between broken sobs and labored breathing. Eleanor told Marcus about being 16 and pregnant, about her father's rage and her mother's shame. She spoke of the difficult decision to give up her baby to the Brennan family who'd been trying to have children for years. "I wanted to keep you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But I was a child myself with no money, no support. Your adoptive parents promised they'd give you everything I couldn't. I thought I was doing what was best for you." Marcus felt the world tilt beneath him. "You've been living in the same town as me for my entire life. You knew who I was when I came to your house that night." "I recognized you the moment I saw you," Eleanor admitted. "You have your father's eyes, but you got my stubborn streak. When you told me about Emma, about losing your daughter, my heart broke for you. I wanted to tell you who I was, but I was afraid you'd hate me for giving you away." "I do hate you," Marcus said, but his voice held no conviction. "I hate that you suffered alone. I hate that you lost Robert and Michael and felt like you had no family left. I hate that I almost destroyed the only mother I have left in this world." Eleanor reached for his hand with shaking fingers. "Marcus, I need you to know something about the wolves, about why I couldn't give them up." "What do you mean?" "When I found those cubs, they were the same age you were when I had to let you go. 6 weeks old, helpless, needing someone to love them unconditionally. In some way I couldn't explain, raising them felt like getting a second chance at motherhood." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. Eleanor hadn't just been protecting 4 wolves, she'd been protecting the family she'd never been allowed to have. Every feeding, every sleepless night, every moment of fierce protection had been her way of experiencing the motherhood that had been taken from her at 16. "The night you came with the guns," Eleanor continued, "it felt like losing you all over again, like someone was taking my children away a second time." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm sorry for not knowing, for not being there when you needed me, for almost destroying everything you love." The word Mom seemed to give Eleanor strength. Her breathing steadied, and for the first time since her hospitalization, her heart monitor showed a normal rhythm. "There's something else," Marcus said. "The wolves, they're dying without you. Tommy escaped twice trying to get to the hospital. They won't eat, won't respond to anyone else, doctor. Martinez thinks we might lose them if you don't recover soon." Eleanor's eyes filled with fresh tears. "They're grieving. Wolves mate for life, and pack bonds are sacred to them. In their minds, I'm their mother, and they think I've abandoned them. What can we do?" Eleanor looked at her son. The word still felt miraculous in her mind, with determination that reminded him powerfully of his own stubbornness. "Get me a wheelchair. I'm going home." Dr. Chen was adamant that Eleanor couldn't be discharged. Her heart was still unstable, her blood pressure erratic. But when Marcus explained the situation with the wolves, something shifted in the doctor's demeanor. "You're telling me that these animals are exhibiting grief responses that could prove fatal?" Dr. Chen asked Dr. Martinez, who had arrived at Marcus's request. "Absolutely," Dr. Martinez confirmed. "Wolves have complex emotional lives. The bond between Eleanor and these 4 is so strong that their survival is linked to hers. If she dies, they'll likely follow within days. And you believe that seeing her might stabilize both the patient and the animals?" "I think it's their only chance," Dr. Martinez said honestly. Against all hospital protocols, Dr. Chen agreed to a highly unusual arrangement. Eleanor would be transported to her home for a brief visit, accompanied by a mobile cardiac unit and nursing staff. It was unprecedented, potentially dangerous, and exactly what everyone involved knew needed to happen. The convoy that arrived at Eleanor's house 2 hours later looked more like a medical emergency than a homecoming. An ambulance, Dr. Chen's car, Sheriff Davidson's patrol vehicle, and Marcus's truck all pulled into the driveway as neighbors gathered to watch the unusual procession. Eleanor was helped from the ambulance into a wheelchair, oxygen tank attached, cardiac monitors beeping steadily. But the moment the 4 wolves saw her through the window, everything changed. Tommy was the first to reach her, his entire body trembling with relief as he pressed his head against her lap. Shadow, Luna, and Frost followed, arranging themselves around her wheelchair in their familiar protective formation. For the first time in 4 days, their tails wagged. "Hello, my babies," Eleanor whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry I was gone so long." The medical staff watched in amazement as Eleanor's vital signs immediately stabilized. Her heart rate normalized, her blood pressure dropped to acceptable levels, and her breathing became deep and regular for the first time since her hospitalization. "It's like they're healing each other," Dr. Chen murmured to Dr. Martinez. "I've never seen anything like this." Marcus knelt beside his mother's wheelchair, watching as Tommy gently licked Eleanor's hand while the other wolves pressed close to her, their relief palpable. "Mom," he said softly, "I want you to know that you're not alone anymore. You have a son who's going to take care of you, and grandchildren who are going to love getting to know their grandmother." Eleanor looked at Marcus through tears of joy and disbelief. Grandchildren? 2 of them. Sarah is 12 and Jake is 8, the same age Emma was when— His voice caught, but he continued, "I want them to meet you properly. I want them to understand that family comes in all forms, even ones with 4 legs and beautiful hearts." As the sun set over Cedar Falls, Eleanor Whitman sat surrounded by the family she'd never dared dream possible. Her biological son, his children waiting at home to meet her, and 4 wolves who had taught them all that love recognizes no boundaries when hearts are open to receiving it. The healing had begun, but the most beautiful revelations were yet to come. 6 months after Eleanor's cardiac crisis, the transformation of her property into Emma's Legacy Wolf Sanctuary was complete. What had once been a lonely widow's modest home had become a beacon of hope that drew visitors from across the country. Professional-grade fencing enclosed 3 acres of natural habitat, while Eleanor's house served as both sanctuary headquarters and the most unusual family home in Montana. The official dedication ceremony took place on a crisp October morning, exactly 1 year after the night Marcus had first confronted Eleanor with his guns and his grief. Now he stood beside her on the newly built observation deck, his arm around her shoulders as they watched his children meet their grandmother's wolves for the first time. "Are you sure they're safe, Grandma Eleanor?" 12-year-old Sarah asked, her voice filled with nervous excitement as Tommy approached the fence line where she stood. "Safer than most people, sweetheart," Eleanor replied, her heart swelling at the word grandma. "Tommy has never hurt anyone in his entire life. He's actually quite gentle for such a big fellow." 8-year-old Jake pressed his face against the fence, marveling at Shadow's massive size. "Dad, is he really the same kind of animal that hurt Emma?" Marcus knelt beside his son, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Yes, buddy, but these wolves are different. They were raised with love instead of fear, and that made all the difference." The past 6 months had brought revelations that continued to reshape everything the Brennan family thought they knew about their history. Eleanor's health had stabilized with the help of new medication and the emotional support of finally having her family complete. Her early-stage Alzheimer's had responded remarkably well to treatment, particularly with the wolves serving as natural therapy animals who seemed to anticipate her needs before symptoms appeared. Tommy had developed an uncanny ability to detect when Eleanor's blood pressure was rising or when she was about to have a memory episode. He would bring her medication at precisely the right times, guide her to a chair when she became unsteady, and provide the kind of emotional support that no human caregiver could match. But the most profound change had come in Marcus himself. The angry, grief-stricken man who had once organized wolf hunts now served as the sanctuary's director, educating visitors about wildlife conservation and the complex emotional lives of wolves. His transformation had become a powerful story of redemption that inspired everyone who heard it. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus addressed the crowd gathered for the dedication, "a year ago, I stood on this property with a gun in my hand, convinced that these magnificent creatures were monsters that needed to be destroyed. I was wrong in every possible way." Eleanor watched her son speak with pride that filled every corner of her heart. The lost baby she'd given up at 16 had grown into a man of remarkable character, someone who could admit his mistakes and fight to correct them. "My daughter Emma died because of a sick, rabid wolf, an animal whose behavior was nothing like what you'll see here today," Marcus continued. "These 4 wolves have taught me that love and proper care can bring out the best in any creature, just as hatred and fear bring out the worst in us." Dr. Martinez stepped forward to share the scientific significance of what Eleanor had accomplished. The behavioral patterns we've documented here challenge everything we thought we knew about wolf psychology. These animals demonstrate emotional intelligence, empathy, and problem-solving abilities that are unprecedented in captive wildlife. Tommy, as if understanding he was being discussed, approached the crowd with his characteristic gentle confidence. In his mouth, he carried a small American flag, something he'd learned to do during the sanctuary's preparation for today's ceremony. The sight of a wolf proudly carrying the flag brought tears to many eyes and applause from the entire gathering. As the formal ceremony concluded, Eleanor found herself surrounded by former students, community members, and visitors who had traveled hundreds of miles to witness the sanctuary. But the moment that touched her most deeply came when a small girl, perhaps 5 years old, approached the fence where Luna was lying in the sunshine. "Mommy," the little girl said, "why is the wolf sleeping?" "She's not sleeping, honey," her mother replied. "She's just resting in the warm sun." Luna seemed to sense the child's presence and opened her eyes, looking directly at the little girl with the same gentle intelligence that had first captivated Eleanor. Slowly, carefully, Luna rose and approached the fence, sitting down directly across from the child. "She likes you," Eleanor said, kneeling beside the girl. "Luna is very good at recognizing kind hearts." The child giggled and pressed her small hand against the fence. Luna, in a gesture that brought gasps from the watching adults, pressed her nose against the fence where the child's hand rested, creating a moment of connection that transcended species. "Can I tell you a secret?" Eleanor whispered to the little girl. "Luna used to bring me tissues when I was sad. She knew I needed them before I even knew I was going to cry." As the day progressed, Eleanor shared her story with visitors, always emphasizing the lessons the wolves had taught her about family, forgiveness, and second chances. She spoke about the night she'd found 4 dying cubs and made a choice that changed all their lives. "I thought I was saving them," she would tell audiences, "but they were the ones who saved me. They gave me a reason to wake up each morning when I thought my life was over. They taught me that family isn't just about blood, it's about showing up for each other, every single day." Marcus's children had overcome their initial nervousness and were now completely enchanted by their grandmother's unusual family. Sarah had appointed herself Tommy's official photographer, documenting his daily routines and habits. Jake had become fascinated with Shadow's protective behaviors, asking endless questions about pack dynamics and wolf communication. "Grandma Eleanor," Sarah said as the crowd began to thin, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course, sweetheart." "Do you think Emma would have liked the wolves?" Eleanor looked at Marcus, seeing the pain that still flickered across his face whenever his daughter's name was mentioned. "I think Emma would have loved them," she said carefully. "Your father tells me she wanted to be a veterinarian, that she cared deeply about animals. I think she would have understood that these wolves are just big, furry family members who happen to have very sharp teeth." Marcus smiled at that, remembering his daughter's determination to rescue every injured creature she encountered. "Emma always said that love could fix anything if you tried hard enough. I think she would have been proud of what we've built here." As evening approached and the last visitors departed, the extended family gathered on Eleanor's front porch. Marcus, his children, Dr. Martinez, and even Sheriff Davidson, who had become a regular supporter of the sanctuary. The 4 wolves arranged themselves around the group in their characteristic protective formation, as if claiming all these humans as their extended pack. "You know," Eleanor said, watching Tommy demonstrate his evening routine of bringing her slippers, "I spent 3 years thinking I was alone in the world. I had enough money to live comfortably, but I was too proud and too heartbroken to enjoy any of it. I thought my family was gone forever." She looked around at the faces surrounding her, her son, her grandchildren, her friends, and her wolves. Now I have more family than I ever dreamed possible, and the money that seemed so unimportant when I was grieving, it built this sanctuary, it's funding wolf research programs, and it's ensuring these four will have everything they need for the rest of their lives. Marcus took his mother's hand, still amazed by the simple miracle of being able to call her that. Emma always said that God works in mysterious ways. I think she would have gotten a kick out of the idea that her death led to saving the lives of 4 wolves and bringing our family together. As stars began to appear in the Montana sky, Eleanor Whitman sat surrounded by the most unlikely family imaginable, knowing that sometimes the greatest love stories are the ones that begin in the darkest moments and end with more light than anyone thought possible. The sanctuary would go on to welcome thousands of visitors, educate countless children about wildlife conservation, and serve as a model for human-animal rehabilitation programs across the nation. But for Eleanor, its greatest success would always be the simple fact that she was no longer alone. At 76, Eleanor Whitman discovered that her greatest treasure wasn't the $2.3 million inheritance she'd refused to touch. It was the family she found when she thought all hope was lost. Like so many of us who've faced the empty nest, the loss of a spouse, or the quiet desperation of wondering if our best years are behind us, Eleanor believed her story was over. But 4 abandoned wolf cubs taught her that love doesn't diminish with age. It multiplies when we open our hearts to unexpected possibilities. When her own son Marcus, given up for adoption decades earlier, nearly destroyed the very family that would heal them both, Eleanor learned that it's never too late for second chances. Her wolves didn't just survive, they thrived, creating a sanctuary that brought purpose, joy, and connection to countless lives. Sometimes our golden years aren't about resting on past accomplishments, but about discovering we still have more love to give than we ever imagined. Eleanor's story reminds us that family comes in all forms, healing happens at any age, and our most meaningful chapters might still be unwritten. What unexpected family has brought you the most joy in your later years? Have you ever found love and purpose in the most unlikely places? Share your story below. We'd love to hear how life surprised you with second chances.